Hey everyone, welcome back to Falcons Central Radio Show on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I am Aaron Freeman over at FalFans.com. I'm joined by my co-host Scott Karasik, who writes for the Falcoholic. We are back this week to talk about the Atlanta Falcons. The 2015 season is over. We are now approaching the off season. And the big news this past week was the Falcons decided to retain Thomas Dimitroff. We talked quite a bit about his job status and job security over the last month or two, with the rumors leaking, whatever you want to say, they were doing, that he was on the hot seat. But clearly Arthur Blank felt otherwise. So I guess we'll put a button on that and probably won't have any more Dimitroff debates until, I don't know, the draft time or something like that. But Scott, you had predicted that Dimitroff would stay, so pat yourself on the back, I guess.
Well, the reason why I predicted it is because I kept hearing from people who are a little bit more in the beat writer side. They're like, yeah, Dan Quinn really likes Dimitroff. He's not going anywhere. And whenever D-Led tends to put out those accounts of Dimitroff staying, but he should be fired. Like, I think he's staying, but I think he should be fired. It's basically D-Led sounding like a little petulant child that Dimitroff doesn't talk to the media anymore. Like that, whenever it sounds like that, it's like, oh yeah, this dude's definitely staying because D-Led's a punk and he's pissed off about it. I think it's the right thing. Like, I hate to sound like I'm, on the nuts of Dimitroff right now, but you don't fire a guy 1 year into his second head coach when the team improved 2 games, when the team did get better, when you look at the defense and you go, wow, this defense actually was good, when there weren't any signings this year that were like, man, that was just a horrid signing. This is going to kill the Falcons cap the way that the Soliai and Jackson signings looked last year. Like, the Reed signing looks bad, but it still is like, oh, well, it's not that much on the cap this year. And then worst case scenario, you cut him after this year, and it's like you paid him $6 million for 2 years, which really isn't that bad. And if you think about it, like, he didn't get any huge big signings this year. No real big hits, but it wasn't a big deal because the signings he got did provide value. I know you're not the biggest Adrian Claiborne fan, but they only paid him like $3 million for what he did. And he did hit the quarterback quite often. He did get after the quarterback quite often. And I think we will see a better pass rush, at least next season, when you've got Vic Beasley and Hageman and Jarrett all starting to come into their own. Because Hageman was taking huge strides the last couple of games this year. And I think you give him another offseason, but an offseason with Dan Quinn the whole time through, who knows exactly how to get to him by now. I mean, I think it'll work out.
Okay. Well, I think people who are long-time watchers of this show and long-time followers of me on Twitter kind of know how I think about Dimitroff. I thought he should have been fired last year. The Falcons' decision to keep him this year, whatever. I think as far as I'm concerned with Dimitroff, I think the proof is in the pudding. And that pudding is Dan Quinn is going to be basically doing all the things that Dimitroff should have been doing the last couple of off seasons, getting a tight end, drafting running backs, drafting wide receivers, improving the offensive line, adding pass rushers, adding athletic linebackers, adding depth in the secondary, all those sorts of things that our GM should have been doing the last couple of years that he did not do. And, for Dimitroff, in the case of his staying, he's not going to really be held accountable for his earlier mistakes, but he'll get to tag along on Dan Quinn's coattails as he starts to do his job for the first time since 2010. So congratulations to Thomas Dimitroff. You can still get to ride your bike around Flowery Branch every day. And, hopefully we won't be having these conversations in the future about whether or not you deserve to keep your job, because everything's going hunky-dory in Atlanta, and, there is no real reason to complain about him anymore. So we'll see.
Well, remember when the Falcons were good in 08 to 2010 and they had a vision and it kind of helped out? And
Yeah.
you're like, oh, yeah, this is what the team's supposed to look like. They finally have a vision again. They're not this team of 2012 to 2014 that didn't really have one. They actually do want to have balance. They actually do have a coherent scheme on offense that makes sense, at least in the run game, that they hadn't had on, outside of the Mike Tice year. They really hadn't had it under Cutter. I just think it's going to be a better fit for what, like, Dimitroff has a style of, this is what I need to go get now. Between 11 and 14, I don't really think he had that. I think it was like, hey, we should get this and this and this, but we don't really know if we need an edge rusher. We don't know if we really need this. And now they're like, yeah, we need an edge rusher. We need a cornerback. Like, we needed a tight end. So, but we can't get it all in 1 year. So that's
Okay.
great.
Well, not to rehash it, but the reason why we didn't have a vision after 2010 was because of Dimitroff's decision to make a gigantic trade, basically under the pretense of phase 1, trade for Julio Jones, phase 2, phase 3, profit. Ultimately, that's what it boils down to. They didn't really have a follow-up after they made the Julio Jones trade. They just figured out, hey, this trade is going to be the difference between us going from the 1 seed to winning a Super Bowl. And when that didn't work out, they didn't have a backup plan. And, they got close, but one of the reasons why they didn't get to the Super Bowl is because of all the other areas of the roster that were neglected between those years. And, that's the bottom line. So, again, if the Falcons are going to keep Thomas Dimitroff, then fine. It's not a big deal. At this point in Dan Quinn's tenure, he's basically an errand boy. It's like Dan Quinn says, I want this guy. Dimitroff goes out and signs him. He's very far down on the totem pole in terms of his value. So I don't really even give him credit for last offseason, because I don't think he was really running the show. But, he's along for the ride. And ultimately, whether this team is successful will be determined by Dan Quinn. And if not, if Dan Quinn isn't up to snuff, then, when he's pushed out the door, then Dimitroff will go with him. And we'll have a whole new set of coaches and GMs to complain about or to congratulate or whatever the case may be. So, I'm ready to move on. So, whatever.
All right. Let's get to the mailbag questions.
We got a bunch of them. It's going to be a lot of mailbag questions. Appreciate everybody for sending them in. Our first one came last week. It is a Jalen Smith question from the Colorado Falcon. He asked, Jalen Smith tore his ACL, MCL, and I see his draft stock plummeting. Would you take a second-round gamble?
In a heartbeat. Because Jalen Smith's basically what we all hope Spoon would be. So hopefully he just doesn't stay injured and the Falcons have a really good football player out of it.
Yeah, if he falls to the second round, I'd take a gamble. Assuming that we don't get an inside linebacker in the first round, I'd take a gamble on him in the second round. Yeah, but I probably wouldn't do it at 17, but I'd probably do it at 51 or wherever we're picking in the second round if he fell that far. All right, our next question comes from at DirtyBird77. He asks your thoughts on a few prospects: Miles Killebrew, Carson Wentz, and Jaron Kearse.
I mean, Carson Wentz is a really good quarterback. I don't know why the Falcons would be looking at a quarterback, but he's a really good quarterback. Probably the guy who should go in the first round, the guy who should go first overall, but won't. I do like Miles Killebrew. I don't think he's going to be a really high draft pick, but he could be a guy who comes in who you see the Falcons taking like the mid rounds, like the third, fourth round, as a linebacker or safety product. I think he might be a better fit at linebacker. His frame's not anywhere close to maxed out, and he's about 220 pounds, solid 6'3". You put some weight on him, you might have a what's the name? You might have a potential for a poor man's Levante David.
Okay. Yeah, Wentz is going to the Senior Bowl, and I have this feeling that he's going to show out at the Senior Bowl, and he'll eventually be a top 10 pick. So, I think the only real knock on Wentz is where he played at North Dakota State. I don't really think there's that much anything else that you can really nitpick. I haven't seen a ton of his tape or anything like that because obviously the Falcons aren't in need of a quarterback, despite what many people may think. So I haven't really been paying that much attention to him. But I do think eventually he will be a first-round pick. I think he'll be, whether he's, drafted over Paxton Lynch or Jared Goff or wherever, but I think he'll be drafted ahead of Connor Cook. So, I think he'll be a first-round pick, definitely. Killebrew, I was a little underwhelmed with because I was reading buzz from a couple of months ago that he was a day 2 guy, and I looked at him and I was like, I don't see a day 2 guy. I see more like a 5th, 6th round guy that's a special teams player, backup, and maybe a couple years down the road you might plug him in and he could be this like Shiloh Keogh type of,
That's how I feel about him.
backup.
I'm not a huge fan of him at safety. I think he's probably better at linebacker.
He just, like, for a guy who was as big as I think he's like 6'2", 230 or whatever he is, he didn't seem that physical to me. So I was a little underwhelmed with his tackling in the tape I saw. As for J-Ron Curse, I'm not a huge fan of J-Ron Curse. I think he's a little overrated. To me, he's a guy who's really big and really fast, but he doesn't really make any plays. And it's not to say that I think he's going to suck in the NFL. I feel like he's going to be like a top 20 pick, and then he's just going to be an okay to above average starter. He'll make a splash play every now and then, but just nothing about his game other than the physical tools that he has that stand out to me. He's not really great in coverage. He's not really a hitter. It's like when people compare him to Cam Chancellor, I just think they're looking at his size and speed and not really looking at their games, because Cam Chancellor was like 10 times better player, I thought, than J-Ron Curse.
He's probably closer to like Thomas Deku, if we're being honest here. He's pretty soft.
Yeah, I mean, like, to me, like, the best case scenario I see for J-Ron Curse is if he can become the very best case, like 110% of his potential. I think he's Kenny Phillips before Kenny Phillips had his career sidetracked by injuries. And Kenny Phillips was a pretty good safety. I think that's max potential for J-Ron Curse, which if he becomes that, then he'll be a very good NFL player, assuming he can stay healthy. But I'm not optimistic that he's going to reach that potential. He's just kind of, he's a specimen, but, because his uncle is Javon Curse, and he's got freakish abilities similar that runs in that family. But it's just, ultimately, I see an average player in a freakish body. All right. Andrew Schauweiler asks, what players from last night's game? Oh, we got a couple of questions about the BCS National Championship. So, Andrew, your boy Jay, Evan Birchfield, and Dirty Bird 77. We will answer, I guess, all your questions about what players stood out. And Evan asked us to pick 2 players from the game, the Clemson-Alabama game, that we would want us to have, and we can't pick Austin or Ragland. So I guess, Scott, who were some of the guys that stood out to you, and who do you want the Falcons to get from that game if you couldn't pick Lawson or Ragland?
If you can't pick Lawson or Ragland, I'm going Kevin Dodd, who made Alabama's right tackle just look like a preschooler all day, was just throwing him around like a rag doll. He was that number 98 that was always in the backfield. I think the Falcons would love to have someone do that. And then the other guy that I would want from Alabama would be O.J. Howard. He's big. He's quick. He was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, and Alabama doesn't know how to work with tight ends that can actually catch. So he was used primarily as a blocker, which is good because it means he already knows how to block. I just want to see him also catch the ball a little bit more. And I think if you brought him in and paired him with Tammy for a year or two, he would learn how to play in the NFL. He'd be basically what Tammy is as a receiver. Like, I don't see him as anything crazy, but I think he could at least be what Tammy is as a receiver with some big playability that Tammy just doesn't have, and then a good blocker on top of it. So basically the all-around guy that Crumpler was, but bigger and faster.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to sit here and rack my brain and come up with some guys that I want from the game that aren't Ragland and Lawson. And I'm kind of drawing blank. I'm trying to think of other guys different from you. Dodd is a good name. I wasn't that high on Howard. He obviously had a monster game. I think with Howard, you kind of you're hoping that he's Jimmy Graham in the sense that when Jimmy Graham was at Miami, he was basically a basketball player, played like 1 year of football. And the thing about Jimmy Graham was when you watched him at the beginning of the year, he looked like a player. He had no clue what he was doing. And by the end of the year, you saw significant gains. And it's one of the reasons why I was a little higher on Jimmy Graham than I think a lot of people, because, you know, I had a second-round grade on him. I probably would have given him the first-round grade if he had more experience, and he ultimately went in the 4th round. But it's one of those things where with Jimmy Graham, he got drafted by the Saints, basically had a redshirt season his rookie year to sort of learn the NFL game, and then became the Jimmy Graham that we all know and hate today.
I like him now that he's not on the Saints.
Yeah. That he's ruining things in Seattle. But yeah, I think if you draft O.J. Howard, you're basically doing the same thing because he didn't really do anything. Like, he would show up every now and then, make a big play at Alabama. He'd usually have one like 20-yard catch per game, and that was about it until, this past Monday's big performance. So I think if you're drafting him, you're basically hoping he's Jimmy Graham. The player that I haven't seen a lot of him, and I know this is not a need for the Falcons, but the Mackenzie Alexander, because I didn't watch him because it's like, oh, he's going to be a top 12 pick. He's not going to be there. Yeah, it was just, but what he did in that game before he got injured and what I've heard about him makes me intrigued by him. I know the Falcons don't need a corner. I know we have Jalen Collins. I know we have Alford. I know we have Trufant, but he just popped to me, for the quarter or the half a quarter that he played that game. So he's a guy I'm going to go back and watch more of because it just, when you can get a good player, get a good player. But those are, I guess, I hope that answers your question.
He's pretty physical. And that's one thing I like about him. Like, if you were looking at corners that you wanted to move back to free safety, guys that were good in zone, guys that could tackle effectively, guys that were physical and didn't mind mixing it up in the run game, Mackenzie Alexander is a guy that kind of stands out there. If you are looking for that next Earl Thomas type move.
Okay. I'll be on the lookout for that. Okay, I think we answered this question about Jaron Kearse. Unless, Scott, you wanted to add any more insights on Jaron Kearse?
He's just soft. Like, he's not a bad football player. He's not a great tackler. He's just very soft.
Yeah. Like, I don't think Kearse is bad. I just think going into this during the season, I kept hearing Jaron Curse, he's Cam Chancellor, he's Sean Taylor. Like I heard these lofty comparisons for him, and then when I watched him, I was like, really?
Never
This
thought.
is the guy. People every time you have a big fast safety, someone always throws out a Sean Taylor comp. I don't know why, but it was just one of those things where I was very underwhelmed when I watched him, and I was just like, I don't get why people are hyping this guy up. I don't see why he's a first round pick. I think honestly, I think if he was normal sized, if he was 2 inches shorter, he'd be a third round pick.
Yeah, probably.
But, when you don't find many safeties that are 6'4", and he'll probably end up running like a 4.5 or something like that at the combine. So maybe even faster. So people will, do go crazy for it. But at the end of the day, I just think he's an average player. But speaking of Jaron Curse, our good friend Jalen Muhammad asks, pick between these three: Reggie Ragland, I'm assuming that's Deron Lee, and Jaron Curse.
I mean, I'm going to go Ragland between the three of them all day.
I think Ragland's the best player of that group. I do think Deron Lee probably fits our scheme a lot better than Ragland does and has at least more upside in our scheme. But I do think, Ragland has a much higher floor than Lee does right now. Like I'm fairly confident that you can put Reggie Ragland in any scheme and he's going to be a good player. I feel like Deron Lee, there's shades of Ryan Shazier, and it's not to say that Shazier is a bad player. He just hasn't had this sort of quick impact in the league that people were hoping when he got drafted.
He was injured a lot as a rookie.
He's a small guy, and like Lee is a small guy too, and he plays small, in my opinion, too often. Yeah. I won't say that he's,
like you can tell. He played 9 games last year, and he only played 12 games this year, and he's looked good throughout. Like this year, he looked pretty good, but again, why are you going to put that much money and that much time into a guy who might emulate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Shazier is going to be good. I think he's going to be good in the long haul for Pittsburgh, but it's just one of those things. When they got him, it was kind of like, oh, he's going to be our replacement for Lawrence Timmons, and I think they're probably going to keep Timmons another year because Shazier isn't ready yet to be that guy yet. So I think if Lee's going to be a guy that's going to take 3 years to develop into the player that he has the potential to be, you have to weigh that. Do you want Ragland, who's going to come in day one and be the guy who's going to be, but he's probably not going to get that much better than what he is in our scheme? I think, that's just a balancing act that you have to determine. Are you in it for the long haul? Or do you want the immediate upgrade? All right. Andrew Scheiweiler has another question. He says, what do you guys think of Sua Cravens for Atlanta?
I like him a lot. I think he's a better fit as a weak side guy than a strong side guy, or than a middle. But I do like him a lot. Probably better in the role that Durant was playing this year. And I think if you draft a guy like Sua Cravens, cutting a guy like Durant probably isn't that big of a deal. Not that I'm saying you should cut Durant right away, but I personally didn't think Durant was that good this year.
Okay. I don't really love Sua Craven's fit as a linebacker in our scheme. I think he could be it. I think he has potential to grow there, but I feel like if you want him to have an immediate impact, you put him at strong safety and you ask him to do what we asked William Moore to do: play in the box, play in space, run and hit guys. And, the only knock on Sua Cravens is I don't think he's much of a hitter. He's more of a drag down tackler, which I don't think you can make the transition. I don't see him basically I'm saying I don't see him as a Thomas Davis type of guy, because Thomas Davis would, destroy humans when he was at Georgia. He would just wreck dudes. He would make people's mothers weep with how hard he hit people, and Sua Cravens isn't that guy. So I feel like if Sua Cravens plays linebacker, he's going to be more of a situational player than a every down playmaker. I think he's going to be used like Mark Barron is, who is a situational player in St. Louis and has been very good in that role, but making him into an every down linebacker, I don't know if that's gonna fly, but we'll see. All right. Next question comes from Brosef929. Yes, what are the top 5 prospects you guys want in the draft in the first round if they're available?
Let's see. Shaq Lawson, Emmanuel Ogbah, Laquan Treadwell. I mean, we're going top 5 guys, right?
Yeah.
Let's see. Who else? Miles Jack. For sure, Miles Jack. Dude's ridiculous. Just trying to think of one more. I mean, the first round's like super top heavy, and then there's like a couple guys here and there. Oh, Joey Bosa.
Okay.
Let Joey Bosa tear his MCL for like the combine and like fall to 17, and then have that 6-week injury and be perfectly healthy, and the Falcons magically have the next Patrick Kearney. I would love that.
All right.
I mean, that's what Joey Bosa is, if we're being honest.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I don't get the JJ Watt comps for Joey Bosa, but people have to do what they do. Top 5. I don't know if I have 5 guys. It's still early in the process, and I'm much farther behind than Scott is, who actually watches tape during the fall, and I barely watch any. Probably Miles Jack. I just recently discovered Carl Joseph. I would put him. I think he is a first-round talent.
He's just injured all the time.
Yeah. I'll throw Bosa out there. I like DeForest Buckner. He reminded me a lot of Cam Jordan. And I guess, Shaq Lawson. I'll go with Shaq Lawson. I guess.
Shaq Lawson. I don't know what to tell you.
All right. Dirty Bird Wilson asks, looking at pick 17's draft history, would you be for or opposed to trading back in the draft and possibly picking up another second?
I mean, I'd be perfectly cool with trading back in the draft. I really don't care about the whole, this is what pick 17 does historically. Like, I don't give a shit. What happened at that pick in previous years doesn't mean dick for what happens to that pick this year. It just really doesn't.
Okay.
And honestly, if you don't have one of the top 8 picks this year, you're probably not getting a blue chipper. You're getting a red chipper.
Yeah, that's possible. Yeah, I'm generally speaking, I'm for trading back as much as possible, because I think it's really about getting as many picks as possible, because I think it's a cumulative process as opposed to the common, I think, misconception that you can hit this home run grand slam with 1 pick and it completely changes your franchise forever. It happens from time to time, but who knew this scrawny little kid from Michigan taken with the 199th overall pick was going to be that guy? I'm, of course, referring to Tom Brady. So it's one of those things where you just never really know who's going to be that guy. And when it does happen, it's very, very rare. And it's usually involving a quarterback. But yeah, so I would be for it, trading back. Yeah, okay. That answers the question. All right. Andrew has another question. He says, would you say trading up in this draft is out of the question with the Falcons not having a 5th round pick? I should also remind you, Andrew, that the Falcons also do not have a 6th round pick. That was part of the Andy Levici trade.
I would not trade up in this draft just because I don't feel like it's worth it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. It's one of those things where I think, generally speaking, trading up is not favorable, unless you wind up only giving up like maybe a late round pick. But because the Falcons only have 5 picks this year, they really can't afford to have less than 5. So, 5 is probably too little. So they, at some point, if they don't trade back in the first round, they probably need to trade back at some point and pick up another pick or two, so that they can at least get to like 6 or 7 picks this year. Just because they have a lot of holes that they need to. It'd be nice to get it'd be nice to draft a young wide receiver, but because where the prime point of drafting a wide receiver is in the first 4 rounds, and you have needs at linebacker, and you need another pass rusher, and you need safety help, and you need to solidify your offensive line. Maybe you draft a tight end. It's just you wide receiver is basically a luxury at this point, assuming that they can address it in free agency. And so, trading back, getting an extra pick in those middle rounds or in the 5th or 6th round, so that you can take a flyer on some developmental wide receiver for the future, that would be great. But I don't think at this point the Falcons can really afford that right now.
Honestly, I think they should go out and sign Rashard Matthews.
Okay.
That'd be the guy. He showed the ability to be a good, consistent number 2 receiver in Miami. And I think if you put him in Atlanta, he's not going back to Miami. With Devontae Parker there, with who else do they have in Miami? They got Devontae Parker, they got Landry. I mean, they're just Greg Jennings. Let me just pull up their roster right now.
Yeah, he's not going back. They're going to probably cut. I assume they're going to cut Jennings, but they still have Stills. Yeah.
Kenny Stills. So, I mean, you got 3 guys who are instant starters. You got Adam Gase, who loves to run a lot of 3 wide receiver sets, and Stills is perfect for a slot guy, his Emmanuel Sanders role. Devontae Parker is that guy that he's going to feature the way that he featured Demaryius Thomas in Denver, and the way that he featured what's his name, Alshon Jeffrey. And then you've got Jarvis Landry, that like true number 2 receiver that can do it all. So I don't see the need for Rashard Matthews to go back. And if I'm Rashard Matthews, I'm going to go to a place that is A, going to let me start, and B, give me a little bit more cash. If Atlanta paid him $10 million over 3 years to be the number 2, he'd probably take that in a heartbeat, and then he'd outperform the contract.
Yeah. I like Rashard Landry. The only issue I would have with Rashard Landry, or really any receiver, is he's spent the bulk of his time, or maybe not the bulk, but a lot of his time in Miami playing a slot, and I don't feel like the Falcons need to go out of the way to get another slot receiver with Justin Hardy there. But I think Matthews can play outside, so I don't think it's as big an issue as it would be with some other free agent wide receiver. All right. We have another Jalen Smith question. Specifically, Noah Williams asks, how happy would you be if the Falcons got Jalen Smith at 17, or does the injury scare you away from him with that pick?
I wouldn't touch him at 17 just because of that injury.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Jalen Smith is a excellent player. I don't see him as this sort of world-changing linebacker, as the sort of top 5 pick, Luke Kuechly, Patrick Willis type of linebacker. I don't see him on that level. I'm sorry. I was looking ahead to the next question because I know we had a question about a comp for Jalen Smith. And, the player that he reminds me of, and I'm not saying they're the exact same, but he reminds me a lot of Anthony Barr. And I don't feel like with this draft class, you have a bunch of other good inside linebacker candidates. Jalen Smith, I think if you're being optimistic and you say he has the same recovery time that Todd Gurley had, that basically means he's not going to play until mid-November, which basically means he's going to be on the PUP. And for the Falcons, I don't think the Falcons can really afford to have another 8 games or 10 games or whatever the case may be of Paul Warlow starting at middle linebacker. So I'd rather go in another direction.
Having Durant at weak side linebacker either. Let's just put that out there. The Falcons need 2 linebackers, not 1. They need 2 good, fast linebackers that can play in coverage.
Okay. All right. I don't really agree, but sure, that's fine. Okay. The next question is from Nick, and I answered part of it, and we'll get Scott to answer on that. But he says, I know it's very early based on film alone, realistic comps for Miles Jack, Reggie Ragland, and Jalen Smith.
If you want that Luke Kuechly, Bobby Wagner type linebacker, that is your Miles Jack. I actually do like Anthony Barr as that comp for Jalen Smith. That's a really good one, actually. And then what was the third one?
Ragland.
Ragland's like Curtis Lofton if he came into the league knowing how to drop back into a short coverage.
Okay. Then that wouldn't be Curtis Lofton then. But yeah, I know what you mean. Miles Jack, the comp that keeps coming up to me, like I feel like Miles Jack is a lot of players. I feel like there's like some Jared Mayo in him. There's some Thomas Davis in there. But the player I'll pick is Navarro Bowman, just because I'm reminded of the NFC Championship game where basically the 49ers were like, oh yeah, we'll put Bowman on an island against Tony Gonzalez and we don't have to worry about it. And there's very few linebackers that you would do that with in the NFL. And I think Miles Jack has that sort of coverage potential that you can put him on an island against a Jimmy Graham or Rob Gronkowski and be fine with it. And you'd be like, yeah, we're good. Ragland, this is probably a little unfair to Ragland just because I'm comparing him to another Alabama linebacker, but Dante Hightower is the guy that he reminds me a lot of. Good player, not a great player, but a good player and just going to be solid week in and week out. And, put another good linebacker beside him, you're going to be very happy with what he does. And Jalen Smith, Anthony Barr was the previous one I gave. So, all right. We got another one from Noah Williams. He asks, what safeties from day 2 in the draft would you like to see in Atlanta next year?
That's tough because, I haven't really dug deep into safeties. There's some good ones, but I'm just not really overall impressed with the safety class. I hate to sound a little crazy here, but I think I'd be perfectly okay if the Falcons stuck Kamal Ishmael at starting safety next year and then waited till the next class. Get the linebackers up. Get the Kamal Ishmael is definitely not a long-term answer, but I think he could start for a year and be okay. Get the linebackers up. Get the defensive line up. That'll help the back four play better. If you look at what happened in Carolina, that's why their back four can have Roman Harper starting.
Okay. I feel the opposite with you on the safety class. I really like the safety class. I feel like this is a great opportunity for the Falcons to get at least one long-term starter. Some of the guys I like Jeremy Cash. I think he reminds me a lot of Willie Moe. I like Von Bell. I think he could be a very good free safety. I feel like his floor is already what Ricardo Allen is. I'm a big fan of Carl Joseph. I won't say he's Earl Thomas, but I do feel like he could be middle-class man's Earl Thomas in this scheme at a free safety. Let me see. I like Darian Thompson. I think he's also another guy that could be a great free safety. It's not that, Ricardo Allen's a bad player. I just feel like I don't know what his upside is, and I'm willing to give him another year, but I'm like, if you can get a stud free safety, like a guy that is going to be a stud in this scheme, then why not get him? And especially given the issues that safeties have with durability issues, adding good depth at that position. If Ricardo Allen is your backup safety, then you're looking really good. I like Deion Bush. Josh Harvey Clemens is another guy that I like. To me, I'd rather.
Allen could always play strong safety too.
Okay. I don't really see that, but okay.
I mean, I don't think he's like a monster strong safety. I think you'd adjust the scheme a little bit, but I do think he could play strong safety, especially the coverage aspects of it, and be a huge upgrade there.
Okay.
Like I think he can man up on a tight end and be effective, is what I'm saying.
Okay, that's fair. I can agree with you on that. Who's the other? Josh Harvey Clemens is the other guy. I feel like from Louisville, he used to go to Georgia. I think he got kicked out of school or something. But yeah, I would rather have Josh Harvey Clemens than I would rather have Jaron Kearse. Like I think Clemens is going to be probably a 4th-round pick. Based off of at least the current buzz, no one's really talking about him being a 2nd or 3rd-round pick. So I think he would be a pretty good strong safety. He's got some issues. He's not perfect or anything like that, but I feel like 4th round, like I can live with whatever issues he has as a developmental strong safety, splitting reps with Ishmael. I like Jalen Mills, but I don't necessarily know if he's more of a slot corner. I feel like he's more of a Mike Nolan free safety than a Dan Quinn free safety.
That's fair. I'd agree with that one. That moving around, free flying to the area.
Yeah, like the guy that in nickel situations you'll drop him down, let him cover slot receivers, more so than being that sort of center fielder type that Dan Quinn likes in his guys. All right, Jalen Muhammad's next question is Josh Doctson or Corey Coleman?
Corey Coleman all day. But that's just because I got so tired of being abused by Steve Smith Sr. that I'd love to see the Falcons have their own.
Okay. It's an interesting comparison. I'm with you on that. I think I'm one of those people that hates Baylor's offense as far as it projects wide receivers to the NFL. But Corey Coleman is an extremely talented player. Josh Doctson, I think, is good, but I feel like it seemed like a couple of weeks ago people were talking about him being a 1st-round pick before he got hurt. And I don't quite see that, but I do feel like, I feel like he's going to be good, but I feel like he's like, I guess I'm trying to think. The player he reminds me a lot of Tyler Boyd, but he's faster, but doesn't have nearly as good. He's not as good in traffic and has as good as hands, basically. Like I feel like you can push around Josh Doctson a lot easier than you can Tyler Boyd. Even though Doctson, he's fine. He's a good player. But yeah, Corey Coleman's got higher upside, but yeah. Okay. Andrew Schauweiler asks, seeing a lot of mock drafts having the Falcons take Jarran Reed in the draft, what are your thoughts on if this was the pick?
I mean, I don't really know. I don't know.
Well, I think this is what happens when you have January mocks. People don't really know what what team needs are, and they look at Paul Soliai as a guy as getting up there in age, might be on the roster bubble going into the offseason. The Falcons don't really have a strong starting nose tackle to step in for him. Joey Mbu is did some nice work at the end of the season, but I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, he's ready to start, and play 500 snaps a season based off of, 12 good snaps at the end of the season. So you look at that and you're like, oh, Jarran Reed would be a perfect fit in Dan Quinn's scheme at that nose tackle spot. And so I think that's why a lot of people are mocking him to us. But, as we get further and further into the offseason, I think that will probably stop.
I mean, it's just Falcons don't need a defensive tackle. Honestly, they really don't. If it was a defensive end, yeah, that'd be different. But the more I see defensive tackles mocked to the Falcons, I just kind of laugh a little bit, and I'm like, all right, whatever. This person hasn't watched a game. That's really what it says to me. They just haven't watched the Falcons play if they think that the Falcons' biggest need is a defensive tackle.
Well, I think a lot of it is that there's going to probably be like 5 or 6 defensive tackles taken in this draft, and you're like looking around when you're doing these mocks in the first round, I should say, and you're looking at guys that, okay, where are all these defensive tackles that I think are going to be first round picks going to go? And so it's like, oh well, this is about the point in the draft where Jarran Reed should go. So somewhere between like 15 and 25, Falcons are as good a fit as anybody. As for the second part of your question, Andrew, what do I think about it? I like Jarran Reed, but I think he's more of a 2-down player in the NFL than he was in college. I don't see him being that disruptive a pass rusher at the next level. He can get after the quarterback, but I think probably on a good defense, he'll be pulled off the field on third downs a lot. I have a aversion to drafting 2-down players in the first round, really in the first 2 rounds. But, I think Jarran Reed's going to be a good player for somebody, but I don't necessarily want it to be the Falcons. All right. Evan Birchfield asks, finally, when do you start to getting serious about the draft talk? After the Senior Bowl, Combine, etc.?
That's about when Aaron starts to get serious. I get serious about October. I'll start watching film, like really starting to dig in a little bit. But even then, I'm not super deep into film study until about December. And then probably by the time May hits, I've seen at least 2 or 3 games of the top 200, 250. And if you didn't pop when I watched you the first 10, 15 plays, I probably didn't put you in my top 250. And I'm not saying you got to be like ridiculously good to pop on those first 15 plays, but you got to at least show the athleticism that says, hey, this guy's an NFL player. And there's some guys out there that just have no business being in the NFL. And you can tell within 10 plays of watching them, you're like, this guy's not going in the draft. This guy's not worth an NFL football player. So you just don't even waste the time, really.
Yeah, I wish I could get serious about draft talk at Senior Bowl. I don't. To be honest with you, Evan, I don't get serious about draft talk until like the end of March, after free agency, the first like wave or two of free agency. Like right now, like for me, like I don't really dive into tape anymore during the fall or really in the winter or in the spring as much as I used to. I'll watch, like I try to get a handle on the top 100 guys or so. And if they play a position of need for the Falcons, I will try to at least watch a game or two just to kind of have an idea of those guys so that, when you ask these mailbag questions, like, what do you think about this guy? It's like, well, I watched a game or two and I thought this, but it's not really sort of this firm opinion. I don't have strong opinions after watching two games. You really can't really have a strong opinion about a player, I think, until at least you watch 4 or 5 games, preferably 6 or 8 games. So for me, it's one of those things where it's just kind of spitballing until after free agency. And then to me, that's after teams make their free agent moves, then you really know, oh, this is a real need now. Like if the Falcons go out and sign Jordan Cameron and Logan Paulson in free agency, then tight end is off the table. So I'm not really going to pay that much attention to tight ends anymore. So that's when I'll get serious about whether – but if the Falcons basically sit on their hands in free agency at tight end, then I'm like, oh, the Falcons think they're going to be able to get a good tight end in this draft. I need to do a lot more homework on this tight end group. So that's when I get serious about it. It's really not until after free agency. And then basically the entire month of April, then I'm super serious. And then me and Scott can argue about whether we should trade up for Jadeveon Clowney every week on the show like we did 2 years ago.
Yeah. And now that I look back at it, I'm glad that they didn't, because those picks wound up being it wound up being Devontae Freeman, Rashid Hageman, Jake Matthews, and Vic Beasley. The ones that I was saying, hey, trade these up for J.D. Clowney. Looking back at it, I'm glad they didn't make that trade because that wound up being pretty good. Even if you don't think Rashid Hageman is going to be this great pass rusher or be a solid like 4-sack guy, you still realize, hey, he's pretty good for what he's been the first 2 years, knowing he's a project. And then you got the best pass rusher on the team. You got a long-term answer at left tackle, and you've got a potential long-term answer at running back. So,
yeah.
Which goes back to the shotgun method comment.
Okay. What's next? I lost my place. Evan Birchfield asks, if Calvin Johnson doesn't return to Detroit and becomes a free agent, how realistic would it be for us to go after him?
Depends on how much money he wants, but I'm going to put the chances between 0 and 1%.
Okay. Yeah, I think Scott's right. It's going to be about money, and the reality is when you look at some of the contracts, like Calvin Johnson's going to be 30 this year, this offseason. Now, I don't think Detroit's going to let him go. If they let him go, it's going to be for a trade. He has trade value. He's probably got another, assuming he doesn't have to deal with major injuries, he probably has another good 4 or 5 years as a starting receiver in this league because wide receivers can usually play at a high level until they're like 34, 35. At least wide receivers of Calvin Johnson's caliber should at least be able to make it that far. And Jerry Rice made it to 40, so, you never know. But when you look at some of the contracts that other 30-year-old-ish wide receivers signed in recent years, like Vincent Jackson and Larry Fitzgerald, they were averaging like $10 million a year. I think Brandon Marshall signed for like $9 million a year. So if you're looking at Calvin Johnson, if he's signing for $10 to $12 million a year and he has 5 more years, you're looking at somewhere between $40 and $60 million contract. And with Julio Jones making $70 million and Dan Quinn being a coach that wants to be a physical run team, he's not going to invest $120 million into wide receivers. It's just not going to happen. So, Calvin Johnson would be awesome to have in Atlanta, but unless he's going to, basically play for free, it's just not realistic that we would really make a strong run at him. Plus, again, I don't think Detroit's going to cut him. So they're going to be like, yeah, we'll shop Calvin Johnson if you want to give us a first-round pick for him. But if you're not willing to give us a first-round pick for him, then we'll just keep Calvin Johnson and have Calvin Johnson. So, yeah. So I don't think it's really realistic. All right. Dirty Bird Wilson asks, I think Mohamed Sanu would be a legit number 2 in our offense. What is your take?
I agree with that, but I don't think you need to pay him a butt ton of money.
Maybe I need to watch more Bengals games, but Sanu has never been a guy that's impressed me that much in Cincinnati. He's like, he'll makes a splash play every now and then, but he's very inconsistent. So, like, I don't know. I liked Sanu when he came out of Rutgers. I thought he was very talented, but he was very inconsistent in college. And I don't think he's shaking that in the NFL. Like, I just remember that playoff game a couple of years ago where A.J. Green was hurt, and I don't even think Sanu had a single target. He was the de facto number 1 receiver in that game. I don't think he was targeted once in that game. Basically, he didn't get open the entire game. And, unless he's basically done a 180 in the last year or so since that game, then I'm just kind of like, I feel I can get just as good a player, if not a better player, for cheaper than what Sanu is going to make on an open market. So that's my take. All right. Evan Birchfield asks, if/when Roddy returns, what current wide receivers do you think are gone to make room for the new wideouts?
Eric Williams, Nick Williams. I think those are the easy choices. I think Hardy's pretty much set because he was a 4th-round pick this past year. You're not going to cut the guy. I think Hester might as well be set because it's tough to find guys who are as good as return specialists. But I could also see a situation where the Falcons draft a guy who can be a good return specialist and has future potential at receiver, and they cut Hester in training camp. So I think out of those guys, it's probably Nick Williams and Eric Williams.
Yeah, I think Roddy's going to get cut. I think Hester's probably going to get cut. I think Williams is probably going to get. I think Nick Williams will probably last till training camp, but depending on what moves we make in the offseason, he'll be on a bubble going into next summer. As for replacing Hester, I agree with you. I would be for keeping Hester if possible. I think he still has something left in the tank. But I think, there's a guy out there that surprised me that he didn't get a lot more buzz when he got cut this past fall was Jeremy Ross, and I think he's a free agent. And a couple of years ago when he was basically just a kick returner, he was just as good as Devin Hester was. But then Detroit decided, hey, let's make him into a wide receiver and let's cut Ryan Broyles for some reason. And since then, Ross hasn't been as good a kick returner. But I think if we came to Atlanta and just basically made him into what Hester was this past year, which is a return specialist only, I think maybe he could return to being the guy that he was a couple of years ago. Okay. Noah Williams asks, how much cap space does Atlanta have before cuts? I've seen different numbers floating around.
I've got him at 28.7 right now, I want to say. That's including a projected $10 million carryover from 2015. That's money that they did not use in 2015 that they could use this next year. And then future years, they've got a ton of money, like insane amounts of money. So they could have a really good team, or they could lock up the guys that they want to lock up. They could lock up Alford and Trufant and Jake Matthews pretty easily long term, and Schrader. There's not really a ton of guys out on the team right now where you're like, man, this guy's essential long-term lockup. So that does help out with this offseason. There's one guy who's not under contract who I think is essential long-term, and that's Ryan Schrader. And I don't think he's going to be that expensive. I think you pay him $4 million a year, call it, and everybody's happy because no one else really thinks he's that great outside of like Pro Football Focus and me.
Okay. And his mama.
Yeah, she's likes me a lot because I say good things about him.
The numbers I've seen, like the official NFLPA salary cap says the Falcons have $4 million of cap space right now, so that carries over into next year. And then looking at over the cap and Spotrac, their numbers, their projections for next year are about within like $500,000 of each other. So I think with the carryover, it's like 19 or something like that.
They're not factoring the carryover.
Yeah, no, I'm saying like once you add the carryover, then the Falcons have like 19 million.
They're also get off a very conservative 150 million cap, and I'm using 3. So
there you go. So obviously, there's we'll find out officially in March how much cap space the Falcons have when they set the cap. So until then, basically, it's going to be somewhere between 19 and 28, give or take a couple million here or there. So I guess Noah split the difference and say 25.
And that's still way more than enough to where you're like, you know what? If they kept Roddy, it wouldn't be that horrible.
Okay. For the listeners, there's a very audible eye roll from Aaron Freeman after Scott said that. Yeah. All right. Noah's next question is, do you have any thoughts on Demario Davis for the Falcons?
I mean, not really. I haven't really dug deep into all the different free agent possibilities this year. I don't like Demario Davis just off the top of my head. I'm not thinking, oh my God, that's a guy you got to go after though.
Yeah, I wasn't that big a fan of Demario Davis when he was coming out. I thought that was a big reach by the Jets in the second round. And then I haven't really heard much over the last 4 years that suggested that I was wrong in that opinion because it sounds like they're ready to move on from him. So, typically that's not a positive sign when you use a second-round pick on a guy and then basically 4 years later you're like, we're good. I mean, that's what we did with Curtis Lofton, and that didn't really work out for the Saints all too well. So, yeah. So, sure, if we get him cheap, 1 year, $2 million, sure, I wouldn't be against it, but I don't know. All right. Now, who are your top center options in free agency besides Mack? That is Alex Mack he's referring to.
I like Ben Jones. I think he's going to be a lot cheaper and he's a lot younger.
Okay. Well, no, if you haven't watched the last about 4 episodes, I think, because I think Scott and I have debated Ben Jones about every show for like the last month. I'm not as big a fan of Ben Jones as Scott is. My number 2 after Mack would be Stefan Wisniewski. Then after that, I think you're just kind of signing a stopgap, which I think Ben Jones would be, and probably be more expensive than other stopgaps you can find and not that much better. Some of those guys that I would throw out as potential 1-year stopgaps just to buy you a time before you can draft or sign a better option would be Ryan Wendell, Will Montgomery, and there was one other guy.
If Montgomery is available and you can get him, you definitely have to. He knows the scheme and he's a good fit. So I wouldn't mind Montgomery either.
Yeah, the only issue with Montgomery is I think he's like 32. So it's basically like you're really signing a guy that's probably going to retire, after next year. So,
which is why you draft his replacement.
Yeah. I think if you're not getting if you're getting a stopgap, then you definitely have to draft somebody this year, as opposed to next year.
And for that, going back to one of the previous questions, I did like Ryan Kelly, the center for Alabama.
I got to look at him for the first time really in that game the other night. I liked his lateral agility. It seemed like he, the rare times that Alabama runs the stretch play, it seemed like he did a good job doing that. The only issue is Alabama doesn't ask their blockers to get downfield very much and get on the second level. And the one time I really noticed him trying to block on the move and hit a moving target on the second level, he completely whiffed. But again, it's based off of one game, so I'm not going to draw too strong a conclusion based off of that. But other than that, he did impress me, but I don't necessarily know if he's, the classic zone blocking Kyle Shanahan, Alex Gibbs type of center. But okay, our next question comes from Brosif929. Do you think the Falcons are going to do a lot in free agency?
In terms of volume, yeah, they'll probably do a lot. In terms of money and big names, I don't know about that.
I think we'll make one big splash this year as opposed to last year. I don't know who's going to be. I'm hoping it's Alex Mack, but I think we'll get one big name guy that they can plaster on AtlantaFalcons.com and have his face smiling for the next 6 months as the big offseason move and whatnot. All right. Next question comes from the Dirty Bird 1998, Luke. What bargain free agents do you think the Falcons will sign? I think Jay Howard is a lock.
Jay Howard? No. Don't you have to be good at football?
Okay. It's interesting that you said that. I don't consider Jay Howard to be a bargain free agent. I'm looking at this. You're looking at the 3-4 guys that are available, and Mo Wilkerson, you can throw him out because he's going to get tagged. And then Malik Jackson, and then there's maybe, Snacks Harrison. And other than, I think, basically, long story short, Jay Howard's probably going to be one of the top 5 3-4 guys available in the market. So I don't think he's going to come cheap to anybody. But I think he would be an interesting pick because he played for Dan Quinn at Florida. had a very good year in Kansas City. The thing is with Jay Howard, though, this is what I was thinking of. Kansas City just gave Alan Bailey like a contract that averaged like $6 million a year, like 2 years ago, as like a contract extension. And Jay Howard outplayed Alan Bailey this year. So I feel like if Jay Howard and his agent are like, well, I'm better than that guy, and he made $6 million from the Chiefs, so Chiefs need to fork up $6 million to me, and I think he'll hit the market thinking, getting a $6 million a year contract is what he's worth. So I wouldn't consider that a bargain free agent. But to answer your question, let me go back to the list. A couple of guys that I had my eye on as potential bargain free agents. I could see the Falcons going after Will Blackman and signing him to a similar deal that we gave Phillip Adams last year. I feel like David Bruton will be a bargain because he's coming off an injury. And our defensive coordinator, Richard Smith, is somewhat familiar with him from Denver. Who else was out there? I think we'll sign Logan Paulson, the tight end. Played under Shanahan in Washington. Isn't going to command a bunch of money because he's basically a blocking tight end. I hope we get some bargain wide receivers because I feel like we need to get at least like 2 or 3 guys. Specifically, I'd love to get any of those guys from the Raiders, like Andre Holmes or Rod Streeter. I don't think any of those guys are going to make a ton of money. I probably should have done a lot more research before the show. But yeah, those are a couple of names out there. I hope that satisfies you, Luke. Speaking of that, you asked about David Bruton. His next question is, do you think David Bruton Jr. would be a good fit for the Falcons scheme?
At strong safety, sure.
Yeah. Bruton is a guy, I had like a 4th or 5th round grade on him when he came out of Notre Dame. I was like, oh, he's just going to be a special teams guy. He's a cover 2 safety, special teams guy. He'll be a career backup. But over the last couple of years, every time Denver has had an injury at safety, he's stepped in and played pretty well in those games, made some impact plays. So I feel like he's a guy that's potentially ready to step out and be a starter. I don't necessarily look at him and say, oh, yeah, we signed David Bruton and we're not going to have to worry about a strong safety position for another 5 years or anything like that. But I feel like he'll be a solid, young, upgrade over what we currently have if you're assuming William Moore is gone. So, yeah. Noah has another question. He says, can you give a few free agent pass rushers you could see us signing this offseason?
I mean, pass rushers aren't very common on the free agent market. Good ones, at least. The name that stands out is Adrian Claiborne. That's how many I think. Like, that's the one that I think the Falcons will have their shot at. Claiborne, Schofield, maybe Bruce Irvin if Bruce Irvin can get away from the Seahawks, but I'm just not really seeing a ton of pass rushers out there that are really worth it.
Yes, excuse me. It's going to be interesting to me because I think we're going to see a bunch of guys get cut, and I think that's going to change things with this market, like Chris Long and Mario Williams. I do feel like the Falcons could make a play for either one of those guys this offseason. Some other guys that I would, that I don't know if the Falcons will go after them, but I would be interested if they did. Robert Ayers, I feel like, could be that, a better version of Adrian Claiborne, that inside-outside sort of guy.
I'd love to see Olivier Vernon come in.
Vernon would be a major upgrade. I don't think he leaves Miami, but, yeah, he would be a major upgrade.
Derek Wolfe would be fun. He's not really a great pass rusher, but he's still a good football player. Malik Jackson would be fun. I mean, I could see the Broncos letting Malik Jackson go and saying, hey, we can replace you. And if the Falcons could get him, that would be a really good fit. but there's not really anyone out there that really just pops off the page where you're like, yeah, this is the guy that's on the list right now.
Yeah, I know Benson Mayowa. The Seahawks were really high on him a couple of years ago, and then they cut him last year. Now he's with the Raiders. I think he's a restricted free agent. So if for some reason the Raiders tender him at the lowest level, I think he's because he was an undrafted guy. Maybe we go after him, and he basically does what Schofield did before he got moved to linebacker as a situational pass rusher. A couple other names. Mike Neal would be interesting.
Dwight Free, Tom Bahama. If you're on budget, you can. Those would be the guys that I would look at and say, like, hey, you know what, Tamba, you made $5 million last year in Kansas City. I want you to do an easier. I want you to play an easier role. Just play 4-3 defensive end. You never have to drop into coverage. Come in, play the same side you're playing now, just with your hand in the dirt as the Leo. We'll give you $3 million. Call it.
Yeah. George Selvey would be an interesting pickup if you're looking to replace Corey Bierman and get another guy that can stop the run. Tyrone Walker, Derek Shelby as a rotational guy, depth guy.
Now, a guy that I like that I really liked him coming out of college. He's been kind of underwhelming for the Packers throughout his career, but I think if you could get him for a prove-it type deal, is Nick Perry. Great athlete. Ridiculous athlete. And I think, he hasn't been awful, but he's been like a 3-sack guy when they wanted him to be a 10-sack guy. And I think if you got him in Atlanta and you put him with the right support staff, that could be a similar situation to what happened with Cliff Avril coming out when Cliff Avril left the Lions. He didn't have the greatest years with the Lions. He had a couple good years. He had a couple 8.5 to 10 sack years, but I think he really flourished in the scheme change where the Lions were using him more as a linebacker.
Another guy that just Vinny Curry and Nick Fairley would be two other options that I would look at.
See, I don't understand the thought process behind Nick Fairley.
Well,
the Falcons are already pretty much set at defensive tackle. I mean, unless you're cutting Tyson Jackson and, say, Jonathan Babineau.
Well, I think the thought process behind Nick Fairley is he's better than any of your current interior rushers. And if you can get him if you don't have to pay him a bunch of money, then I think you make an upgrade and you decide, okay, well, maybe Babineau is on more of a snap count, and we sort of basically sometimes we'll throw out Jarrett there, and sometimes we'll throw out Babineau there, but whoever it is, they're lining up next to Nick Fairley, and they rush the quarterback from the interior. Other possibility is maybe you move Babineau to the base defense, kick Hageman out to strong side defensive end to replace Tyson Jackson there in the base. And, you just kind of make it – you kind of, I guess, figure it out later. And you just say, well, we got a guy who could be a 10-sack interior pass rusher in our scheme and with Fairley, and then we'll figure out the rest later. Okay. All right. I know Scott's going to enjoy these next couple of questions. They come from Dirty Bird 77. Am I crazy to think RG3 is better in Shanahan's system than Matt Ryan?
I'm not even going to answer this. Like, yes, you're an idiot. Like, I mean, that's just the honest to God's truth. Just shut up, man. Just shut up. Like, this is just stupid. Like, I'm just dumb. This is just dumb. Absolutely dumb. If you don't think Matt Ryan's the right quarterback for the Falcons, quit being a fan. Like, I'm just being honest here. I get tired of the bullshit that hits my mentions every single week about how people are like, oh, Matt Ryan sucks. It was a single season in a new scheme, and he'd been playing in Earhart Perkins his entire friggin' life, and now he switched to a Walsh setup. Like, quit with the bullshit. Next question. Let's trade Matt Ryan to the Texans for Clowney and 2 picks and sign RG3 and draft Carson Wentz. Like, dude, put down the crack pipe. Put down the crack pipe.
When we got this question like yesterday, I was so looking forward to Scott's reaction to this question because I knew you would answer it just like that. That's the only reason I put it in.
Here's the view on the Matt Ryan haters. Shut the fuck up. Have some fucking patience. Let him learn the offense so you're not sitting here dealing with the bullshit. Like, it's just a lack of football knowledge is what it is. A complete and utter lack of football knowledge. You couldn't even tell, like, half these people couldn't even tell me the difference between Shanahan's scheme and Cutter's scheme. They have no idea what the differences are. They have no idea what the difference is in the run game, what the pass game is, why Matt Ryan does bootlegs. There's a conceptual reason as to why Matt Ryan does bootlegs. It's not because Shanahan thinks he's mobile. I can tell you that much right now. The idea is that the run action forces the entire defense one direction. And then you do the naked bootleg to the weak side because conceptually, everybody should be focused over here. And then the misdirection leaves you with a levels concept on the other side. So you've got 3 different levels that you can hit for a check down. If that first level, that intermediate level is that first one that's the read on 90% of those plays, that's going to be that Roddy White, Julio Jones spot right there. The lower level is probably going to be a tight end like Tammy or a fullback like DeMarco. What the Falcons don't have right now is that third deep level where Ryan pulls out and, oh, hey, look, there's a deep shot available right here. Let's just hit the guy deep off the rollout. Once the Falcons get that deep guy, that second deep guy, that's not Julio Jones, I think they'll be fine. But the idea that Matt Ryan's the wrong quarterback for this offense is just fucking stupid.
Okay, there you go. To answer your question, Trey, though, I would trade Matt Ryan to the Texans for Jadeveon Clowney, 2 first-round picks, and then sign RG3 and draft Carson Wentz. I would do that in a heartbeat, but it's not going to happen. So whatever. All right. Brosive929 asked, do you think the Falcons need a backup quarterback? Do you think the Falcons need a backup quarterback sooner rather than later?
I'm going to go with sooner. I don't think Renfree's good. Now, who is going to be, I don't know. If RG3 will come on a vet minimum contract and not have any fucking arrogance about him, sure, bring him in. But otherwise, you don't want him on the team.
Okay.
And no, Michael Vick should not be on the Falcons. He's fucking garbage.
Okay. All right. I won't say that, the 4-letter word that nobody wants me to say. Do you I think we need a backup quarterback. I think it'll be Schaub, probably, maybe Dan Orlovsky or somebody like that. I'm with you, Scott. Renfree's okay. He just hasn't done enough to really feel comfortable with him basically being one start away from deciding whether or not you're going to make the playoffs or not. And I think where people, you constantly hear this sort of argument, well, you're probably going to lose the game anyway, so why does it matter who your backup quarterback is? Yeah, you're probably going to lose the game.
Like 45, 46% of the time.
Yeah,
you
it's
still have a
something
shot with a backup quarterback.
And when you're a playoff team, that 40% win success, over the course of a game or two, you look at Denver. Brock Osweiler went 5-2 as a starter this year. That's the difference between Denver being the 1 seed and being out of the playoffs. They basically were like 1 or 2 losses away from being out of the playoffs, from being the 1 seed. So it's one of those things where, a backup quarterback, having a competent backup quarterback matters when you're a playoff team. Now, if you're the Titans, you're like, who cares who our backup quarterback? Our goal is to develop Marcus Mariota. We don't really care who the backup is, Mettenberger or whoever. But when you're a team like the Falcons or the Seahawks or the Panthers, you want to have a good backup quarterback. Look at the Panthers. Derek Anderson's come in these last couple of years and really, like, Derek Anderson won, 2 games last year? If he doesn't win those 2 games, then Panthers aren't in the playoffs last year. So, I think if the Falcons want to be a playoff team, then they need to address their backup quarterback situation. All right. Our friend Cookie by Nature asks, nonsensical question of the offseason, when will the Falcons have another black quarterback?
I mean, who cares? I hate to put it that way. I don't care if a quarterback's white, black, yellow, red, whatever. Give me a quarterback that can play, and I'm happy. If they can play football, that's all I care about. If they can play football at a high level, that's all I want.
I don't think it's going to happen this year. Again, I think if we go veteran, we'll probably go with Matt Schaub. I don't see the Falcons drafting a quarterback this year. Maybe they get someone like Vernon Adams. If Trevon Boykin goes undrafted, maybe we pick him up as a undrafted free agent and have him compete in camp. But probably, at the earliest, maybe 2017, maybe we take a flyer on Josh Dobbs in the middle round or something like that and see if we can develop him or something like that. But I don't know when it's going to happen.
I mean, looking at the free agents, Tavares Jackson might be okay and worth it.
He seems to be pretty content collecting that check in Seattle, though.
He does. I'm just throwing names out there.
Yeah, that's fair. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Josh Johnson, but I don't know how much better than Renfrey he is. And then Thad Lewis. Those are the 3 names that are out there. Because I don't consider Joe Webb a quarterback. I consider him a receiver because he rarely lines up at quarterback. I mean, any of those guys, there's just a whole lot of crap out there at quarterback right now.
I do love me some Thad Lewis.
I'm not even throwing out Vic. Like, let's not be stupid here. Michael Vick will never wear an Atlanta Falcons uniform ever again. Arthur Blank made it very clear the minute he got cut, he is not welcome back to the team.
Okay. All right. Crushing dreams every day on this show, Scott. All right. Smorgasbord 9 asks, TD is coming back. Please give me some hope and talk me off the ledge.
There was a vision in 08 to 2010. TD wasn't that bad. He was actually pretty good. He built the team that did win 5 straight playoff games. Not 5 straight play games. That made it to the playoffs and had 5 straight winning seasons. He built a team. Yeah, it had some depth questions, but it was still a pretty good team. I think with coaches that believe in developing players and at least getting the most out of what they can with these players, we'll see better draft results. I think a bigger issue was Mike Smith and his just complete ineptitude of developing players and putting rookies in when he was supposed to, like, hey, let's develop this rookie and turn him into a good player. As much shit as we talk about Corey Bierman, it's tough to say that that was a bad 5th-round pick.
Yeah. Until Grady Jarrett's the best one they've had over the last.
Yeah. But 5th-round picks don't hit like that. 5th-round picks are 99% of the time special teams guys.
Yeah. It's
So
basically Trent Cole, Richard Sherman, and special teams guys.
yeah, and like Corey Bierman might be one of the top 100 fifth-round picks in the league in the past 10 years.
Yeah, easily.
Maybe.
Yeah.
So when people put all this like love into a fifth-round pick, unless it is someone like Grady Jarrett or like Ricardo Allen's a damn good fifth-round pick when you look at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't think that Dimitroff is that horrible when he's got a plan of this is what I want in a player. Get me this archetype. When it's that and it's not, oh, hey, just draft talent, it works out better.
Okay.
Because when he was brought in initially, it was system specific, drafted talent.
Okay. Yeah, there you go. I hope you come off the ledge, Smorgas. Brosive929 says, who are your top 5 Falcons of all time?
It's gonna be a lot of linebackers on this one. Jesse Tuggle, Tommy Nobis, Deion Sanders. I might get a little bit of crap for this, but I'm gonna throw Matt Ryan up there as one of those, and then Roddy White. In the future, we will see Julio Jones knocking Roddy White off that ledge.
Okay. Yeah, if this is a question of who are the 5 best players to play for the Falcons or who are my 5 favorite players that play for the Falcons, I guess I'll go 5 favorite. I'll say Julio Jones, Jonathan Babineau, Jesse Tuggle, Deion Sanders, and Ironhead Hayward. Sorry, Jamal, but you're number 6 on that list. So,
and if we're doing my 5 favorites, still a lot of linebackers. Jesse Tuggle, again, still Tommy Nobis. He's Mr. Falcon. He should be in the Hall of Fame, but he's not. Keith Brooking was always one of my favorites. Like I said, linebackers. Devontae Freeman is right up there. And then Grady Jarrett. Like already up there because I see a lot of Babineau in him. And I think he could eventually be better than Babineau.
Okay. Yeah, if I was trying to list who are the 5 best, I'd probably say Deion, Nobis, Tuggle, Mike Kinn, and probably Claude Humphrey would be the 5 that I would say they were the 5. They had the 5 best careers, or probably not the 5 best careers because Deion only played for about 4 or 5 years here, but he's Deion, so.
He still played more games with the Falcons than any other team.
Yeah. Okay. Evan Birchfield asks, if you hit the Powerball Wednesday, what's the first thing you buy?
Well, just to disappoint you, I didn't hit the Powerball today. And the first thing that I would have bought was all of my debt. I would have paid all that shit down. Had been debt-free, paid off anybody in my family's debt, paid off my closest friend's debt. And from there, yeah, that's basically it. Like, that'd be the first thing I do. Make sure everybody that I was close with was debt-free and had like $1 million on top of it to where they were set.
Okay. All right. Sorry, I was laughing at the next question. If first thing I'd buy is like, put some gas in my car. That'd probably be the first thing I'd buy. Yeah. But, eventually I get to the big stuff. But probably the first thing I'd buy is put some gas in the car. On my way to a nice chicken wing dinner. Our last question comes from Jalen Muhammad. He asks, if Aaron has 70 chicken wings, how many yards can Trevon Boykin get on his first TD throw? I don't know. I don't really get it, but okay. I mean, give me 70 chicken wings. I'll take that.
I mean, just it's just incoherent. Like this, I don't just know.
Okay. There you go, folks. All right, that's our show this week. Scott, I'm assuming we might be taking a week off just because there's not a lot of stuff going on in Falcons land.
Yeah, I think doing it every other week up until draft build up around March makes sense.
Yeah, I'm thinking we'll probably get some more stuff to talk about as we get to the combine in late February, because that's probably when the Falcons will start cutting guys and we can start gearing up more towards free agency, because free agency starts like the 6th of March or something like that, or that signing period when you can start negotiating with guys is like the 6th. So we'll probably have a lot more to talk about as we get to the end of February and March, and we might go back to doing more weekly shows. But it just doesn't seem like there's a lot that's going on right now. So we'll take a week off. So I guess that, gives you guys more time to send in mailbag questions. You can always use the hashtag Falcons Mailbag, tweet at the show at Falcons PFC, or Scott is at Karasik S. I am at FalcFans, and we will get your questions. Be sure to follow us or to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, rate us and review us on iTunes. Yeah, and there you go. That's it. We'll be back.